Hello, friends. Welcome to Storycraft. On this channel, you will enjoy world-top stories. Let's view the video. The Gladiator Who Became Emperor. Born to Chains. The slaves beginning. The sun blazed over the scorched plains of Numidia, where the scent of sand and sweat clung to the wind like a curse. In a tiny village far from the glory of Rome, a child was born, not into freedom, but into bondage. His name would be forgotten, replaced by a number burned into his skin, the mark of a slave. He was no ordinary child. Even as a boy, his eyes carried defiance, and his spirit refused to bend. He watched as Roman tax collectors marched into his village with swords drawn and torches lit, branding every man and boy strong enough to fight. His father tried to resist. He was cut down before the boy's eyes. That was the day he learned Rome feared courage more than steel. Chained and marched across deserts, the boy arrived in Carthage, where slaves were sold like cattle. On the auction block, bruised and barefoot, a Roman lanista saw the fire in his eyes. "This one," the man grinned, "has the look of a fighter." Bought for silver, he was thrown into a training pit where broken bodies rotted in the sun and only the merciless survived. In the Gladiator school, pain was the first lesson. Whips cracked at the smallest hesitation. Meals were earned with blood. Friendships were brief. Death was a daily visitor. Yet the boy endured. He studied every movement, every weakness in his opponents, and most of all, he remembered the name of the man who branded him. They gave him a new name in the pits, Thrax. It meant the Wild One. He wore it like armor. Years passed. His muscles hardened like bronze, his eyes colder than iron. But beneath the surface, his heart burned with vengeance, not just for himself, but for every slave who had ever cried out in chains. Rome had made a mistake. It had not crushed him. It had forged him, and as he raised his first sword in the sands of the arena, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. His story was only just beginning. Blood in the arena. Rise of a gladiator. Gates of the arena creaked open, and the roar of the crowd exploded like thunder. Thousands of Romans screamed for blood, their hunger insatiable. The sand was already soaked with the lives of those who had entered before. Now, it was Thrax's turn. He stepped into the sun, bare-chested and scarred, holding a gladius that felt like an extension of his rage. Across from him stood a giant, a Gaul with arms like tree trunks, and a hammer that had split skulls like fruit. The crowd jeered and placed their bets. No one wagered on Thrax. He was the underdog, a nobody. But when the horn sounded, the nobody became something else. He moved with speed that defied his size, ducking the hammer's swing by inches and slashing upward with brutal precision. Blood sprayed the air. The crowd gasped. The Gaul staggered. Moments later, Thrax drove his blade through the man's chest and stood over his fallen foe, unblinking. Silence. Then an eruption of cheers. The emperor himself stood and gave the thumbs up. Thrax had earned not just survival, but recognition. From that day on, he became a spectacle. Match after match, he won with impossible skill. His legend grew. The Beast of Carthage, some called him. Others whispered, the Invincible. Women threw roses. Senators whispered about his strength. But Thrax did not care for their praise. His eyes were fixed on the heights of power, on the empire that cheered while it bled others dry. He began to see patterns. Gladiators disappeared if they became too popular. Arena politics were just as dangerous as swordplay. But Thrax was different. He played both games. He began to speak with the crowd, salute the nobles, learn the names of generals. He studied them like he once studied opponents in the pit. Every victory was a stone laid on his path to something no gladiator had ever dreamed of. Command. Freedom. Rule. But Rome was not ready for what was coming. The arena had raised a monster, not a beast of chaos, but of purpose. one who had mastered death so completely he no longer feared it. And as the Empire cheered him on, they failed to see that their hero in chains was no longer a man of sport. He was a storm with a sword, and a plan. Rebellion of the Sand. A warrior's defiance, thunder rumbled not in the skies, but in the hearts of men chained beneath the great arenas. Gladiators, warriors once proud, now playthings of the Roman mob, had started whispering the same name. In the dark, Thrax. The undefeated beast of the Colosseum had done something no other gladiator dared. He refused to kill. In a final match meant to entertain a bored noble, Thrax stood over his fallen opponent and dropped his sword. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Emperor leaned forward. Was this rebellion or mercy? The man he spared, a former general, now disgraced and sold into the sands for treason. Thrax offered him a hand. Not today, he said. That moment, simple yet thunderous, would ignite a revolution. Back in the cells, guards stormed in to punish him. But the slaves, dozens of them, rose behind Thrax. For the first time, the handlers bled. Blood smeared the torches, screams echoed in the stone corridors, and Thrax stood in the center, calm, victorious. He had become more than a symbol. He was now a leader. In the nights that followed, he trained the others, not just in swordplay, but in unity. Gladiators who once fought for scraps now shared bread. Enemies became brothers. Plans were whispered over flickering flames, maps, weak points in the city, corrupted guards willing to look the other way. The rebellion grew like wildfire. In one sweeping midnight assault, they burst from the bowels of the arena, cut through the city guard, and stormed the Lannista's palace. The very man who bought Thrax like cattle now begged on his knees. Thrax didn't flinch. You taught me how to kill. Now learn what it means to fall. Steel flashed. The rebellion had begun. Rome woke to flames licking the dawn sky. Gladiators roamed free, no longer entertainers, but warriors of vengeance. The people cheered not for Rome, but for Thrax. And deep in the Senate, old men whispered in fear. A gladiator had become a general of the people. Sword and strategy, the path. To power Rome had seen many wars, but none like this. The enemy was not a foreign king or barbarian horde. It was a man born in chains, now rising with an army of slaves, soldiers, and citizens behind him. Thrax knew brute strength would not be enough. Rome had legions, disciplined, deadly. So, he turned to strategy. In the shadows, he met with disgraced senators, bitter generals, and merchants ruined by taxation. Promises were made, secrets were traded, power began to shift. He moved swiftly. His rebellion seized ports, cut off supply, routes, and raided Roman outposts. Every city that fell welcomed him like a liberator. Statues of emperors were torn down. In their place, carvings of a gladiator raising a broken chain. The Roman emperor, furious and desperate, dispatched his finest general, Marcellus, known as the Hammer of the East. A war veteran, a legend. But even Marcellus underestimated what Thrax had become. The two armies met in the Valley of Ash. The battle was a storm of swords, dust, and screams. But Thrax was not just a warrior. He was the symbol of every man Rome had crushed. His troops fought like lions. Marcellus fell, and with him, the illusion of Rome's invincibility. Victory was no longer a dream. Thrax's forces surrounded the capital. Panic erupted within the palace walls. Senators abandoned their posts. Citizens opened the gates not with resistance, but with hope. Thrax entered the city not as a conqueror, but as a savior. Flowers rained from the balconies. Women wept, men knelt. And at the foot of the imperial palace, Thrax stood silent, gazing at the throne, once unreachable. It was not the steel that had won him the empire. It was purpose, unity, and fire, born of injustice. The Iron Crown, From Slave to Emperor. The throne room was silent. Marble pillars stood witness to history. Thrax walked toward the seat of power once held by tyrants, killers, gods in mortal skin. Now it waited for a man who had crawled from dust and blood to reach it. He did not kneel. He did not ask. He sat. Outside, the people chanted his name. Inside, a new empire was born, not from legacy or bloodline, but from pain, courage, and the unbreakable will of a man who refused to die in chains. The Gladiator was no longer a slave. He was emperor. Thanks for watching. Subscribe our channel Storycraft for more interesting videos.